Welcome to Shielded, the podcast dedicated to helping Florida's first responders understand the laws that affect their work and their lives. We bring clear answers, practical tips, and stories to help you when you need it most. If you're a first responder in Florida, this is your playbook. Be sure to check out all of our resources at bichlerlaw.com. I'm your host, Paolo Longo, and I'm here with my partner, Geoff Bichler. At Bichler and Longo, this is what we do. Now let's get into it. All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Shielded, the First Responder Podcast. I'm Paolo Longo, your host, and I'm here again today with my partner, Geoff Bichler. And this is, I think, part four, right? Part four of our series on PTSD within the first responder space. If this is your first episode and you're just sort of watching this one first, the first three we're dealing with at the beginning, we talked about how there was no law, right? There was no law. In the old days, first responders having PTSD, suffering from mental nervous injuries, they didn't get any. There was no coverage for them. There was no wage loss. There was no medical care. Back in 2007, our legislature passed a law that at least provided medical, right? So if they went to a bad scene, they needed counseling, they needed help, at least they could get medical care. It didn't cover lost wages, but at least we could get some medical care for them. Then our next episode, we talked about Jerry Reeland's case that was following the Pulse shooting in Orlando. We talked about his journey and how that case affected, legislative change, ultimately leading to the law being amended to allow for wage loss. Our third episode, we had the good fortune to actually have Jerry come in and talk to us, tell us his story from a personal standpoint, talk about his journey, talk about how he's been recovering and the advocacy that he's continuing to do in this space. And we're very grateful to have had Jerry come on and talk to us. So now part four, we're going to continue the discussion, but really this segment is going to talk about, really post 2018, even though we got this new law, does it really help? How has it helped? What are the holes? Geoff has recently published a white paper on the current state of the law, the need for change, what needs to change, and how we're going to try and get that done. So, Geoff, I'll turn it over to you to talk a little bit about the white paper, and we'll just get into it.
Okay.
So, what prompted you? I guess let's start out with why the white paper? Why?
Well, it's pretty clear to me, and it has been for some time, that, the law, as it's currently written, is just not working. I don't think it's even working the way that the legislature intended it to work. Because, this goes back again to the Jerry Reeland case and the initial push for legislation. I mean, most people could not believe that somebody like Jerry Reeland would not be fully protected by workers' compensation. In other words, that he would receive all the necessary medical care and all of the necessary lost wages. It is almost incomprehensible, right, to think about that. In the situation that he described, how he was impacted psychologically, how he was out of work without pay, all of that, which he described in his own podcast appearance with us recently, right? So, when this issue was addressed legislatively, I don't think for a minute that the folks that sit in Tallahassee in positions of power really understand what it looks like on the ground when a claim like this is made. We had a lot of debate about this, Paolo, back when they were considering the legislation, which is when you look at the law they had outlined, what kind of problems could we anticipate, and could we have done better, right?
Right, and to clarify, the problem in Jerry's case wasn't that he wasn't getting medical care, because they authorized medical care and he was getting his doctors. The problem was once they told him you can't work anymore,
right,
there was no remedy for him to try and get those lost wages paid, right? So that is the issue that kind of spawned the whole movement to get the legislature to change this law as it stood, to allow for folks in Jerry's position that were taken out of work for an industrial accident to at least get their wages while they were getting treatment, right?
Correct. But, again, because the law is so narrowly crafted, that it covers, such limited circumstances, essentially, that it's not doing, we don't believe it's doing what the legislature intended it to do. And so,
right, because remember when we were in Tallahassee, everybody's clapping when they passed the law and everybody's patting themselves on the back saying, okay, now we have this, right? Now we fast forward from 2018 to 2025 and we're still scratching our head saying, what in the hell are we doing?
Paolo, nobody's getting lost wages. I mean, that's the reality. I mean, we have maybe a handful, and we've got hundreds of these cases, right?
Yeah.
But maybe a handful of our clients qualify under the current restrictions, right? So those folks may be getting medical care, but they're not getting the needed lost wages. And so when you ask, like, what prompted the white paper, that ultimately is a reason, right? Because we have tried these cases, we've recognized the difficulty associated with the burden of proof, which is nearly impossible with respect to securing lost wage compensation. And so it's like, okay, we just have to do something about this. And, Jerry said something very interesting in his podcast, because he also recognized this issue. And he said, it's almost like they just wrote the law for me, the Jerry Reelan law. So, if you happen to be inside, the Pulse nightclub shooting or something similar to that, well, then you're going to get lost wages, right? But short of that, you're not. And, again, I think that was kind of shocking for Jerry to understand, that's the reality of the current state of the law. So,
yeah, and I don't think that, like you said, I don't think that the legislature intended that at all. I mean, I don't think that was the point.
No. I think they had the best intentions. And that, they try to, of course, they always try to draft legislation as narrowly as possible to cover particular things. But I don't think they had any idea that, these claims would be as aggressively defended and denied, and the statute would be interpreted as narrowly as it has been. Right. So what that leaves us to do is we either have to highlight the problems through litigation like we did in the Reelan case, or alternatively go to the legislature and ask for reform.
Right. Well, we spend a lot of time highlighting this in litigation, right? We try a lot of these cases. We litigate a lot of these cases, and we get in front of a judge and say, okay, this is what happened. This is what all the doctors say. And then what happens? You get an order saying, well, it doesn't meet one of the qualifying events. So
it's not a qualifying event, or it doesn't meet one of the regulations, which is defining, something shocking to the conscience, right? You can't handle cases like this in the way you handle a typical workers' compensation case. Because there are a number of really, really important factors that make these cases unique. And, I do talk about that a bit in the white paper, but just in terms of, what prompted the white paper, it goes back to a meeting that I had with a deputy director of FDLE some months ago, where, they had recognized there were some problems and asked, that I kind of highlight or outline the problems that we're seeing with regard to these claims. And so rather than just do it in email form, I thought, let's do a deep dive. Let's do a white paper. Let's try to inform the community about these problems and see if we can't build some real momentum politically to do the right things by our first responders with these types of issues.
Right. So let's talk about some of the holes. What are some of the problems?
Well, where do you want to start?
I don't know. I mean, we can start anywhere you want, man. I mean, there's enough of them to go around. So, I mean, first, I guess is just the qualifying list, right? I mean, it just seems if you make a list of things that only qualify, then you necessarily have a whole giant list of everything else in the universe that doesn't qualify.
Correct. And, that probably is the most obvious issue that needs to be addressed legislatively. When they passed this law, they included some of the diagnostic factors in the DSM-5, which is what the psychiatrists use when they're and psychologists as well, when they're making a diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder. There's a diagnostic model, and the model does include some of these horrific triggering types of events, but there's also a catch-all, and the catch-all is where most of our first responders fall. And that is, they've had a multitude or repetitive trauma over many years, over a long period of time. So that, the claim is more akin to a repetitive trauma claim than a specific injury by accident, where one particular thing is the cause of the problem, right? And unfortunately, the way the statute reads and the way it's been interpreted is the only way you qualify is if you can tie your specific post-traumatic stress to one of these triggering events, right? And if it is an event that shocks the conscience, you then have to go into the regulations, which is very specific, as to, well, this is an event that would shock the conscience, right? Rather than letting the doctor determine that, right? It's the legislature through the regulation trying to determine what is actually shocking to the conscience, and that's just no way to do this. But again, the biggest problem with the statute is that it eliminates the catch-all in the diagnostic model, which is where the vast majority of our first responder cases fall. I mean, I'd say more than 90%.
Yeah, I mean, we've spoken to, I can't tell you how many hundreds of first responders over the decades where it's not just one call, right? 500 car accident calls, or 50, suicide cases, or, I mean, it's just,
or 10, babies that, taken out of a pool, I mean, it goes on and on and on. And,
right.
And, think about the lunacy of this, that you would have to say that one particular event is the cause. So, even where the first responder says, I think it's related to this particular incident. This is when things started to happen, right? And the doctor then sees that patient and says, oh, well, so this event occurred and it was part of the equation. But I wouldn't say that that is the entire cause of the post-traumatic stress, because there are all these other events, right? That would actually eliminate entitlement for that first responder, because the burden is that we demonstrate one specific cause, one specific event, and it's just rarely going to be the case that we see that.
Right. And I think calling it lunacy is actually a compliment, because it's beyond lunacy, and that takes us kind of to the next point, which is, well, who's making this diagnosis, right? I mean, the statute is so restrictive in who can actually, make the diagnosis, that it's another almost impossible hurdle for, a first responder to make, right? Because it's got to be a medical doctor. It has to be a psychiatrist. They can see counselors for years, be diagnosed, get treatment, but those opinions don't even come into our system.
Completely another bizarre piece of this law. And it's a catch-22, and we've talked about that, not to get too deep in the weeds on this, but it requires a diagnosis by a psychiatrist who is an authorized treating provider. And what that means is the carrier or the risk management entity, whoever's handling the case, will have had to put a doctor on the file, accepted the claim, had the diagnosis made by an authorized treating doctor in order for it to be covered. Right. And so it's really putting the cart before the horse, if you think of it this way. You can't get a diagnosis from an authorized treating provider unless the employer and their risk management handling entity agrees to give a doctor. So by simply refusing to assign a doctor to a case, they've defeated the statute, at least with respect to the lost wage compensation.
Yeah. Yeah. And how about the stigma? I mean, is that still, do you think, a burden for a lot of people, preventing somebody from filing a claim? I mean, I think it still is.
Well, there's no doubt about it. I mean, and just one final point on the, who can make a diagnosis in the system. Any qualified, provider of medical care, which should include, even a social worker, a therapist, right? Those folks should be allowed to participate in the system and make a diagnosis. And, fine. At least then we're still going to have to go through the normal process of the workers' compensation system, which means, the employer carrier, they're going to get to choose the doctor ultimately that is the treating provider. But, at least that simplifies the claims handling process, and it makes it simpler for our folks to, to pursue these types of claims without this bizarre catch-22 that exists. But, with respect to the stigma, Paolo, there's no doubt about it. We're getting calls every day from agencies or from people inside agencies that they don't know how to process these claims. There's retaliation, there's backlash, there's continued stigma associated with these types of conditions. And I speak about that to some degree in the white paper itself, because, it's all part of the same problem,
Right.
which is not being addressed adequately. And
Yeah, I mean, I if I'm being honest, I have to admit that the stigma thing is getting better, right?
Oh,
It
yeah,
is
yeah,
getting
I
it is getting better. I mean, we are talking to more folks than we used to, and I think the reason for that is because they understand that there is help for them, that it's okay to ask for help. I don't think it's anywhere near where it should be, but it is trending in the right direction. And so at least I'm optimistic about that, because if you just look at this space in the last 10 years, the awareness, how many charitable organizations, how many not-for-profits, how many advocacy groups
how many
we have.
podcasts, right? I
Right.
mean, there are people talking about this issue all over the place.
Right.
These are important points, Paolo. Like, you're correct. The stigma associated with the issue is lessened. The problem is the workers' comp component of this.
Well, right.
Because that's where the pushback comes, right? And you can't have this both ways. You can't say that, oh, we acknowledge this issue
as work related.
Yeah, we acknowledge this issue. We acknowledge that it's work related. But once you file this work comp claim, guess what? You're going to have hell to pay, right? Because we're gonna deny this case. Your agency is coming for you now because you had the balls to make a claim, right? Because you were trying to take advantage of what the statute provides, right? And that is the reality. So yes, the stigma is improved in one sense, but you have then again a sort of bizarre disconnect on the workers' comp side, where claims are, number one, not being pursued because of the concern about the stigma related to that, and also the backlash that is a natural consequence of these claims being made.
Right, even after they openly and willingly acknowledge that the treatment is necessary due to the work component.
Right. And they'll send people to EAP all day long, right? And you've got peer support units that are popping up in every agency around the state. And we want to support these guys. Yes. We understand it's an issue, but this disconnect that happens with respect to the legal rights that should attach is one of the biggest problems I've ever seen in the course of look, I'm doing this work 35 years. And, I've never seen the kind of confusion and chaos surrounding something that should be just taken as a given.
It's almost like this. It's almost like the statute made the problem worse.
Well, you and I have joked about that. And I think, in fact, it has, right? Because prior to the 2018 legislative revisions, you could get medical care for a mental nervous injury. And that could be, depression, anxiety, or PTSD. I mean, that mental nervous injury is not defined by the statute, right? So, when we then put into place the PTSD language, which is in subsection 5 with all the triggering events, now people think you can't even make a claim at all.
Right.
with our,
Unless it's for one of those specific things.
unless it's one of the specific things. And guess what? That's what they're also hearing when they make a claim.
Right.
Like, oh, sorry, you're not covered because you don't have a triggering event, which is completely untrue, by the way.
Right.
Bordering on fraud. You deny a claim and say, sorry, you don't have a triggering event. Well, what about the entitlement to medical care? Right.
Yeah. And I mean, and that defeats the whole purpose of the pay and investigate, right? Where we used to get carriers, I would say, okay, we'll go ahead and send you to a doctor. Let's get a diagnosis. Let's see what the doctor says. And if the doctor says it's related, right, and then you need treatment, we're going to go ahead and provide care. Now it's like you get the carriers, the adjusters, the employers, they're making the legal determination, the medical determination, just based on a list of things in a statute. And they're like, well, this person that died with 19 instead of 17, so they're not a minor, so therefore it doesn't count. Therefore, you don't have anything. Therefore, there's no case, claim denied.
Right. And it's all based on this language that was added in 2018 and completely removing from the equation at least the ability to get medical care, full medical regardless. Right. And so I do address that in the white paper as well, Paolo. The 120-day thing, I mean, that's a pet peeve of mine, right? Because they can't really have information that would allow them to deny a claim in a lot of these cases, but they're doing it anyway. And if they don't know, then statutorily they are obligated to pay and investigate. And fine, give us a doctor. Let's see where this leads.
Yeah. So what do we do, right? I mean, what's the solution? What's your proposal? What's the fix, right? What's the next step?
Well, we don't have enough time to really get into the details of each proposed fix. All of that is addressed in the white paper. But ultimately what I think needs to happen is we've got to have a serious public policy discussion about improving this law. And so, I make a number of recommendations at the end of the white paper about how to improve this law and what needs to be done in order to really protect this community with these types of issues. So I would just encourage people, rather than trying to go into detail in a limited time frame, I'd say, all of the outlines for proposed revision are contained, within the body of that document.
Right, but there's an idea that we can get this thing off the rail, or back on the rails, rather. Get the law to where it should be to provide the adequate benefits the way that the 2016 statute was intended.
Yeah, well, I mean, the simplest fix obviously would be to add the catch-all provision, that is in the diagnostic model. So, repetitive trauma, repetitive exposure to these types of events qualifies not only to make a diagnosis of PTSD, but qualifies for purposes of lost wage compensation.
Right. Like here's a novel concept. How about we let the doctor decide, right?
Yeah.
What's related, right? How about we let the doctor say what somebody has and what somebody needs to get better, and what they should do regarding work or not work, right? Just like with an orthopedic case. Okay. If somebody, is chasing a bad guy and they fall and they break their leg, does the employer or the adjuster decide what treatment the guy gets? No, they send him to a doctor and they say, okay, doc, what is it? What happened to this person, and what do they need, and when can they come back to work? Right. I mean,
well, that's how every other workers' compensation case works, right? This is the one type of a case where that is not the issue, right? Because the doctor isn't making the determination. The statute itself makes the determination, largely based on factual findings that a judge of compensation claims will ultimately have to rule on. And that's not how our system is intended to operate. So I think if I was just going to talk about one legislative fix, that would be it.
Right. Let the doctor decide. I mean, just like in every other claim, right?
Well, it's not like they don't control the choice of medical anyway, right? I mean, they're selecting the doctor.
Right.
So,
right.
Okay,
right.
Fine. You got this system in place. You get to choose the doctor. But hey, let's live with what that doctor says about work restrictions and lost wage compensation. Rather than playing this game with triggering events and all the nonsense that we currently have to deal with.
Right. And triggering events isn't even a medical term. right?
Yeah.
I mean, I've never heard any doctor use the word, or any psychiatrist say, well, this is the triggering event. I mean,
This podcast is a triggering event for me.
yeah, I mean, I'm getting triggered right now too. Um, but, but, but seriously, I mean, it's a farce. It's a farce. I mean, I understand what the legislature intended, but the reality that we're dealing with, from 2018 now, it
Right.
is, I mean, look, we're in the trenches every day, right? I mean, we're talking to these clients every day. We're in court every
Paolo,
day.
we've had hundreds of these cases at this, right?
And it is just, it's like, we're just keep banging our head against the wall. So hopefully, we can get some traction on this. And, so for our listeners, if you want a copy of Geoff's white paper, it is available for download, for email, for whatever you want to do with it.
Let's put a link in the show notes.
I'll put a link. We'll
Yeah.
put a link in the show notes. You can go to the website, bichlerlaw.com, and you can take a look at the white paper. It's really good. For everybody else, if any of this information has been helpful to you, if you're a first responder, a spouse, a loved one, a friend, please like, share, check us out on Facebook, Instagram at bichlerlaw.com. Again, the website for Geoff's white paper is bichlerlaw.com, and you can, you can email us and you can reach us all individually at info@bichlerlaw.com. So thank you again for listening, everybody, for all our first responders. Thank you for all you do for us, serving and protecting our community, and stay safe out there.
Thanks, Paolo.
Thanks for listening to Shielded. At Bichler and Longo, this is what we do. We've represented thousands of first responders across the state of Florida. If you need assistance, don't wait. Please reach out. To learn more, head over to bichlerlaw.com or email us at info@bichlerlaw.com. You can also follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Bichler Law. And if you found today's episode to be helpful, please share it with a fellow first responder who might need to hear it. Until next time, stay safe and thank you for all you do.